No problem. One moment. Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the Q&A session, if you would like to ask a question, you may press star 1 on your phone. Now, I would like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Patrick Shepard. You may begin.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon and welcome to our Outside Activities Massive Open Online course. I'm Patrick Shepard and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Cheryl Kane-Piasecki.
Hey, Patrick.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing well.
Good. So this is our first session of our two-part Massive Open Online course covering outside activities analyses. And the reason we do this as a Massive Open Online class is because I think outside activities are one of the most complicated areas to advise employees. They're sort of wide-ranging. They require us to consider a lot of rules. The process is really important. It's very easy to run into problems. So we really want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to look at an exercise, to practice, to see how you do, and then on Thursday get some feedback about how the exercise went. See if you were able to identify all the issues or if there were areas that you didn't see.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of our long-winded way of saying it's going to be incumbent upon you to actually do the exercise we're going to assign you today. Meaning, truly, I'm being glib, but truly, the point is to give you an opportunity to walk through the rather complex analytical process that outside activities presents, and to give you a chance to practice it and then debrief it with us on Thursday.
Yep. So you may have noticed that we have a lot of materials for this class. There's not just sort of one or two handouts. There are a bunch of different documents that you're going to need to use in order to complete the exercise. And we've really tried to create some tools to help you. We know this is challenging. We know it's easy to make mistakes when advising on outside activities. We know that many of you who have prior approval requirements receive a lot of information from your employees to help you do that advice. And we want to give you the tools to help you analyze that correctly. So what we want to do today is walk you through some of those tools, walk you through the exercise itself, and then talk a little bit about outside activities that are indeed outside activities,
Yes.
Meaning done in someone's personal capacity without government sanction, and those activities that are undertaken with outside organizations as part of someone's official duties. Mm-hmm. This course is the outside activities course, so the exercise we're going to do will be, we will analyze that situation as if that person is proposing to do this in her personal capacity, outside of her government capacity. But we do want to make sure that you're aware that there are options. There are ways that your agency may elect to assign someone to participate with outside organizations in their official capacity. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of documents to get through, so we want to get started.
Applicable authorities does a fairly good job of accurately summarizing what each of the relevant authorities, what the elements are in order for you to determine whether or not it could potentially pose a problem for the activity that your employee wants to undertake. So we do try to give you a fairly articulate and very close to the statutory language summary or regulatory language summary of each of these authorities, but they are not a substitute for the actual authorities themselves. So while this is a job aid that's intended to assist you in sort of red flagging things, when it comes to doing an actual legal analysis of any, under any of these particular authorities, we would, as always, suggest that you go to the authority itself and make sure that you're using the actual language of the authority and not a summary of it. And to assist you in that, the key questions that are at the far right of the document are precisely to try to get at whether or not, based on the facts that you have, it is likely that the elements of that authority are going to be met. But it gives you an indication of the kind of information you're going to need in order to be able to determine at a basic level whether or not you should flag this authority as potentially being implicated.
No, absolutely. And I think there are a few things that you want to keep in mind when you use this document. There are some choices that we've made that we think will help you ensure that your advice is complete and accurate. And one of those things is that we've laid out all the authorities in numerical order.
Yes.
One of the hardest parts about this kind of work is making sure that our advice is complete, meaning that we have considered thoroughly each of the applicable authorities and that we've made an affirmative determination that that authority isn't going to pose a problem, or that it may pose a problem, and we've counseled the employee to take steps to make sure that problem doesn't become manifest, or we found that the problem is so significant that the person cannot go through with the activity. But we must make that determination for each of the authorities. And as you go through the exercise, we would encourage you to do so in this order. So begin the exercise by considering whether 18 U.S.C. Section 203 may pose a problem. Make a determination that either this is something that we need to think about and work through, or it's definitely not going to pose a problem. And to not move on until you've made that determination and then proceed to the next authority, in our case, Section 205, through the criminal statutes, then through the relevant sections of the standards of conduct. And the reason is because there are going to be things that jump out at you. You say, oh, there may be a problem under subpart E, for example, of the standards. But we don't want those salient problems to blind us to some of the issues that we may not see immediately. So we want to be very thorough and careful as we go through this activities, and we'd encourage you to do that while you're conducting the exercise.
And we can assure you that that's precisely how we're going to do the debrief. We are literally going to march you through every one of these authorities in the order in which they appear in the table of authorities, and we're doing it for just that reason, because I think that's when some of these authorities don't occur for us in our portfolio of advice and counsel as much as others do. And so there is always the risk of completely misapprehending or just simply not considering an authority in the context of a situation where you're able to readily identify the most obvious potential conflicts or standards of conduct issues. But those authorities that you don't encounter as often and just aren't as familiar with might very well pose at least a risk, and it's harder to identify those without forcing yourself to actively consider them.
Yeah, so this will be the area that you're able to show your work. Our second document here is the outside activities analysis sheet. And it's going to look very familiar to you if you have seen if you have taken a look at the table of applicable authorities, because this document, what it does is it follows the format of the applicable authorities document, and it allows you some space to present your analysis, to answer some key questions, to indicate the additional information you may need. So the documents that we have available to us may not answer all of the questions. You may need to get some more information from the employee, and if that's the case, we want you to note that here. So we're not suggesting that the documents that we provided to you in this document are sufficient to answer all of the questions definitively, but they may show you areas where you need some additional information. So we've provided you in this document places to consider each of the applicable authorities. And we would encourage you to go through those. Through those authorities one at a time, indicating whether something is likely to be an issue, is a risk, or is definitely not going to be a problem. So that's what we're asking you to do between now and the next session, which is to go through each of the authorities one at a time using the table of applicable authorities, and then making your notes here, whether you have enough information, whether you need more information, and whether you believe that it's necessary for this person not to do the activity. To do the activity once we've taken some steps, or that it's likely not an issue, so we don't have a problem. And you'll do that for each of the authorities. So I suppose the next question is, what is it that we're going to talk about? What is our scenario? Who is our person and what do they want to do? And in our case, we've given you another document, and that's a request for approval of outside activities. And this form, I think, Cheryl, we adapted this from an actual agency form.
Yes, I believe this is similar to a form, if not identical to a form that I believe was based upon a form that I believe HHS currently uses. And we just adapted it for our purposes. We may have scaled it down a little bit, but we think it's a fairly complete document with respect to the kinds of information that it asks for.
Yeah, so we have our employee here, Amanda Murillo. We have some information about her. We have her grade, her salary, the title of her position. She's a research meteorologist. And we have a lot of information about what it is that she proposes to do. So starting on page 2, we can see that this activity is going to involve some teaching, speaking, and writing, as well as service on a board. Those are going to be important facts as we do our analysis. We also find out that she's going to learn that she's been invited to work as a counselor for the American Meteorological Society. So we have a sense that this work is relatively close to her job as a meteorologist with the government. So that's some information that we're going to want to make a note of. We have some other information about the society. We could probably look them up on the internet. We know it's a professional association. We know that she's not being compensated, or at least she's telling us she's not being compensated. We know that she may need to travel for this activity, and that the travel will be paid in kind. And she describes some of those benefits. So these are going to be important facts to have as we conduct some parts of our analysis. And we have an indication about how much time she thinks she's going to spend doing this work. So we'd encourage you to review this information very closely. Keep it close at hand as you go through the analysis worksheet, because you're going to have to come back to these facts again and again as you're working through each of the authorities. They may be important in different ways. So this is really the request. This is the thing that we would receive from an employee who is seeking advice, and that is the request for outside activities. If your agency doesn't have a prior approval requirement for outside activities, you may have to get this information through some other means. So it may be necessary for you to follow up with an employee. They say, I'm interested in serving on this board. You may have to go back and get a whole lot of information. And you can use this request form as a possible solution or a possible template or guide for the kinds of information that you should receive prior to beginning your analysis process.
And because we're aware, obviously, that not everybody who is going to engage in this activity works for the Department of Commerce or NOAA or the National Weather Service, we're not expecting you to do some independent research on what a research meteorologist actually does. So we've tried to give you at least a bulleted list of some of the primary duties that we were able to ascertain about what research meteorologists do. And obviously the point here is when we're doing our analysis for purposes of ethics, we need to understand whether and to what extent there is any nexus between the outside activity that's being contemplated and the job that the person is currently doing for the United States government. So again, in order to sort of give you some information to work from, we've given you this bulleted list. And I think if just a quick look down over that list, particularly if you get to the bottom, it's, publish scientific results in peer-reviewed scientific journals and present those results at seminars and conferences. That immediately jumps out as a place where you're certainly going to have some overlap between the work for the society and the work that they're doing for the government.
No, so I think that's really important that we have some of this additional information. And employees aren't always going to bring this to you the first time.
Right.
This is information that you may have to go back and get from them. You may have to ask them a series of questions. You may have to conduct some independent research looking into what this organization does in order to fully advise them. And to that end, we've provided you some additional information about upcoming meetings of the Society. So this is information that can help you to get a sense and flavor of the kinds of activities that our employee might be undertaking so that you can do your complete analysis.
Yeah, and you are certainly more than welcome, obviously, to do some of your own independent research here. I mean, and we would actively encourage you to go on to because the American Meteorological Society is an actual organization. We didn't give you a fictitious organization to operate with. So we would encourage you to do the kind of research you would do on your own if this were one of your employees, and to take a closer look at their website and see what it is that they do and see what information you can find out about the types of activities this person might be asked to do as part of their service as a counselor, which is the equivalent of a board of directors member, to sort of frame out for yourself the kind of questions you would want to ask your employee to the extent that the information they've provided on their request is not ample. And the information we've given you on that outside activity request is fairly circumscribed. There's not a ton of information there. So one of the things that we would encourage you to do, obviously, on your analysis worksheet is to put down some questions that you would ask your employee, additional information that you might need in order to be able to decide whether or not you thought any particular authority was going to be particularly risky or particularly problematic or a deal killer.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. Is 'cause much of what we're doing when we're advising folks about outside activities is sort of predicting the future, right? We're trying to imagine the kinds of work or the kinds of activities that they'll be engaged in that might pose a problem. So the more information we can have about what they're proposing to do and the kinds of work and activities the outside organization is engaged in, the better we can help prepare them for those potential difficulties. So things we might look for is engagement between the outside organization and the government. When we see that, we know there's a risk there and that we're going to need to advise properly. If we see activities where the outside organization is seeking anything from our agencies, there's a potential for difficulty there. Overlap between the responsibilities the employee has in the government workplace and in the outside activity are also things we want to keep an eye out for. And in order to figure that out, what we're going to need to do is learn. We're going to have to find out what the society is involved in, what the employee proposes to do. So we hope these documents help you to do that in a realistic way, in a way that's not unlike the way that you might have to do that if you're advising someone in your own agency.
And as Patrick mentioned at the front end of this, obviously we're asking you to do an outside activities analysis, e.g. meaning that you're going to treat it as an activity that your employee would engage in their personal capacity. But we also are aware that there are certain circumstances where certain types of activities are things where the government, if the agency has the authority, can actually allow the employee to undertake certain activities in their official capacity as an extension of their official duty capacity. And professional society, professional association activities are one of these activities that, it's a long-standing issue, I would say, that the government has had with respect to in what guise, in what manner do we allow our employees to engage in these professional society and professional association activities.
Right.
And I think particularly, although not uniquely for it, but I think particularly for folks who are in the scientific research and other professional research types of fields, professional associations are a way that they establish professional stature. And so there is not only an interest for the individual in their own individual personal professional development, that is derived from participation in these types of outside boards or just the activities of professional societies. But that the government derives a benefit from it too, in that it enables its employee. Well, it enables the government to both recruit and to maintain very high quality level personnel in these very critical professional positions.
Yeah, so we recognize in the ethics rules that the government does have an interest in having certain employees participate with outside organizations, and as you rightly point out in the research community, that can be essential to staying current with the state of the art in a particular scientific endeavor or other research-based endeavor. And it's also very important for people to be able to continue to grow in their careers and in their fields so that they can continue to perform at a high level for the government. So we see that as a real need.
Mm-hmm. And so, to the extent that the government, has recognized that this level of participation is often very much in the government's interest, back in 2013, the Office of Government Ethics issued a final rule where, for purposes of 18 U.S.C. Section 208, we codified a new exemption from the 208 conflict of interest provisions in Part 2640 of 5 CFR. And this was for service in an official capacity for nonprofit organizations. We've given you a copy of that Federal Register notice because there's a lot that's discussed in the preamble to the final rule that helps to explain both the history of the need for a B2 exemption from 208, but also talks a lot about the needs that have been articulated by various professional communities and including the Office of Personnel Management with respect to the government's need to be able to allow folks to participate, and that the government's interest might be so much so that where agencies have statutory authority or other authority to assign people, that it is in the government's interest for people to be assigned in an official duty capacity. Now, some of the conversation in this preamble, I think, is very useful, and you really should take a look at it, because what effectively it does is it says, yes, if an agency has the authority to assign folks, that may or may not be the end of the conversation in terms of the things the government needs to consider when it's deciding whether or not that's an appropriate thing to do. And Patrick, if you could pull up the slides for me, please.
Absolutely.
And I've just basically put in bulleted form on these slides what the discussion is in the preamble. So again, I would ask you to look at the preamble for a more copious sort of discussion of this. But effectively, these are the considerations if you're thinking about sending someone on or assigning someone in an official duty capacity. First of all, the agency has to have the authority to assign. And the presence of a 2640 exemption does not grant agencies authority to assign someone in their official capacity. So you have to independently have the authority to assign someone.
Right.
You really want to make sure that there is mission alignment between the government organization and the outside entity, because while there may be a confluence of interests, between the society and the United States government. Having someone serve in an official capacity on a board or serve as an officer of that organization does not transmogrify that organization into an entity of the United States government. So it remains a separate entity, and the United States government remains a separate entity. And although there may be, again, a coincidence of interests in some areas, that doesn't mean that there's that those interests are necessarily identical at all times. So it's a matter of making sure that there's a mission alignment between what the organization does and what the mission of the agency is.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. So the first thing is that OGE doesn't give agencies the authority to appoint people to these things.
Right.
Right. We can fix problems that may arise from the ethics rules when that happens, but the authority itself is the authorities of agencies generally are given by the Congress and the organic legislation. So they have to have an authority. And there should be mission alignment, right? There should be a reason for the government doing these things, but that alignment doesn't suddenly turn that organization into a government organization.
Right, precisely.
Okay.
Other considerations are funding. Obviously, if the government is providing a federal employee to serve in an important leadership function, as in like an officer, director, or a trustee, which is what 2640 provides for, that's a resource. That's a claim of the government's resources. So there should be some considerations, some fiscal considerations as to whether or not and to what extent the government is in a position to basically provide that kind of material support to an outside organization. That would include, as the bottom bullet indicates, competing work priorities. So this person, if they're going to be engaging in that activity on behalf of the nonprofit organization, that's time that's not being dedicated to other mission-related functions that might otherwise also be under the employee's responsibility. So those, again, are managerial considerations that the government would want to take into consideration. And then finally, I think there's a question of making sure that there's no preferential treatment. And we do state that sort of outright, and that may seem a little incongruous with the notion of assigning someone to begin with. But I think the issue here is simply making certain that there doesn't seem to be an appearance of a certain group or being singled out in some way to the detriment of other similarly situated groups. Again, that's not sort of dispositive. That's just another consideration when you're deciding whether or not it's appropriate for the government to assign someone in those functions in their official capacity.
Right, so it sounds like sort of in sum, the presence of this exception doesn't relieve an agency of the need to do their general managerial due diligence.
Right.
Right. If they're going to make this assignment, they have to consider all of the factors that they would normally make in making a work assignment, including the fiscal ones, competing work priorities, mission alignment, whether we have the authority to do this thing, with a special emphasis on this idea of preferential treatment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
And then the next set of considerations are, and these are also listed in the preamble. Oftentimes, agencies that do undertake to have people serve in an official capacity place limitations and conditions on that participation, because this is a supervised activity like any other activity that an employee undertakes, and so it's managerial discretion to decide what those duties will consist of and whether and to what extent there may be limitations or conditions placed on what the employee can do for the outside organization, or even continue to do for the government in light of their participation in this outside organization. So some of the examples that we give in the preamble to the rule are oftentimes employees are not allowed or not permitted to engage in fundraising on behalf of the outside organization. In part, that's because they'd be engaging in it in an official duty capacity. So absent an authority for the agency to do official fundraising, arguably that's an official fundraising activity. So, and even if an agency has official fundraising authority, it may be that they would not want their employee to use it on behalf of that organization in the context of that service. Similarly, the next two are lobbying and representational activities. And this would be not permitting the employee to engage in lobbying on behalf of the outside organization, the society, or to be engaging in communications back to the government generally, whether it's like technically lobbying or not, but just generally communicating back to the government on behalf of the society. The agency might want to place some limitations on the employee's ability to be basically effectively representing the society back to the government. Although under 18 U.S.C. Section 205, they would be undertaking that as part of their official duties, ostensibly, and so that wouldn't necessarily be violative of 205. But I think it would be something that agencies should strongly consider whether or not that's an appropriate activity for the employee to be engaging in.
I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because many of the ethics rules do not prohibit official duty activities. The purpose of those rules, the purpose is animating those rules may be things that you want to consider from a management perspective. And I think that's especially true with fundraising, lobbying, and representational activities. The idea of playing both sides or using public office to assist private entities, those principles remain even in the absence of a specific criminal or regulatory prohibition.
Mm-hmm. And the three remaining bullets, I think, are sort of reaching to then into maybe limitations you might want to put on what the employee can do for the government that might have an effect on the outside, the professional association or society, which are engaging in certain regulatory matters or investigations or in grants and contracts or other things where that we'd be conferring benefits or somehow engaging in oversight of the entity. That might not be something that the government wants this employee to be able to continue to engage in, notwithstanding that it wouldn't be prohibited under 208 because it's been exempted under the 2640 exemption for this service. So again, it's kind of looking both at limiting what they can do for the outside organization and then also perhaps putting limitations on what they can actually do in their official duty capacity for the United States government where the outside entity might be involved or affected. So, again, it's an understanding here that these are two separate organizations where there may not always be an agreement, or a natural or a conclusive sort of identity of interests between the two, and that we have to always be mindful that that we're protecting the integrity of government programs and operations while still enabling the United States government to do well by its the professional development of its staff.
No, so I think that makes a lot of sense, that the same considerations we have with an outside activity should be considered from a management perspective. Undue influence is still a concern. Using the government's resources for the benefit of outside organizations is a concern. And just because the ethics rules don't specifically tell us we have to think about those things, that doesn't mean we needn't think about those things. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good to keep in mind. And it's also good for us to remember that this is an option, that service in an official capacity with nonprofit organizations is something to consider, because sometimes that is the best solution to achieving the goal of a quote-unquote outside activity request.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think all of the things that we just spoke about, all of the limitations and considerations, are things that you're going to encounter when you're trying to do your analysis with respect to any service that they do in a personal capacity. That these issues are going to have to be analyzed from the standpoint of how do the ethics rules limit their ability to do a whole host of things, including those things that are on that bulleted list, if they're serving in a personal capacity. So it gives you a foretaste of the complexity of the analysis you're about ready to undertake.
No, absolutely. And maybe just before we go, a reminder about what we're trying to accomplish between now and Thursday, what we're asking you to do. So we're asking you to look at this outside activity request as an outside activity request, something someone is this employee is proposing to do in her personal capacity. So we're not going to be looking at the considerations under the exception to 208 that we just talked about. We're going to be imagining this as if she is serving in her personal capacity outside of work. And we're going to use to conduct that exercise first to the table of applicable authorities, which is going to give us a sense of each of the authorities and provide us some questions to make sure they're to help us determine whether or not this is likely to be an issue. And we're going to remember always that if this is likely to be an issue, we want to go to the statutory language and any interpretive guidance necessary to make a complete piece of advice. But we're going to start here because this is sort of our roadmap to the process. And we're going to use that document to help show our work on the analysis sheet. So this analysis sheet is really your work. This is what we'd like you to fill out between now and Thursday to determine for each of the authorities whether they're not going to be a problem, they're going to be a risk we need to take steps to manage, or that full stop, there's no way this is a showstopper. She's not going to be able to do this activity because of the authority. And we want you to do that for each of these authorities, and also we suggest that you do that methodically by going through one at a time, and indeed that's how we're going to do the debrief on Thursday. So we'll be going through these in the order they appear on the form. And in order to complete that work, we've given you the request form that our our imaginary employee has completed. We've given some information about her responsibilities for the government, and also we've provided some information about the society that she proposes to serve in. So we hope that this information in total will allow you to complete the exercise, or at least find out what you need to find out. And we hope you have time to do that between now and Thursday, because we are looking forward to joining you on Thursday to go through the total exercise. Mm-hmm.
So, for anyone who's on the phone who has any questions, who would like to call in with any questions about the exercise or anything that we've said here today, please feel free to do so. And for those of you online, if you want to send any questions you have, or if you have any questions about the exercise, you can either contact your desk officer with the questions, or you may contact either me or Patrick as well with any questions that you have if you're unclear about any of the instructions that you received today.
Yep. And, I think the important thing is to give it a try.
Yeah.
Give it a try, see how you do. We're going to go through it in great detail on Thursday, so you'll be able to find out, I saw those issues, or maybe I didn't think about that. And that's what we're all trying to do, is get a little better at predicting the future. Do we have any questions on the phone?
At this time, we'll begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, please press star 1 on your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. To withdraw your question, please press star 2. One moment for our first question.
And for those of us who are joining us not on the phone, who are on the broadcast, I understand we lost audio for just a minute.
Yes.
Hopefully you didn't miss anything important, and that you have a clear picture of the exercise, and I think we figured out the solution, so we shouldn't have a problem on Thursday.
And as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your phone.
Hopefully that's a good sign that
Yes.
we're reasonably clear in our instructions.
I'm showing no further questions at this time.
Okay, thanks very much. Excellent. Well, if you do think of questions, please feel free to reach out to someone at OGE. And if not, we hope that you find some time to try the exercise out, and we look forward to joining you on Thursday for the debrief.